Hello and welcome to my channel. Today, we are going to see about a book, Thinking, Fast and Slow, by Daniel Kahneman. This book is a fascinating exploration of how our minds work and how we make decisions. Kahneman is a Nobel Prize-winning psychologist who has spent decades studying human cognition, and in this book he shares his insights on the two main systems of thinking that shape our behavior. In this video, I'll share my key takeaways from the book and my personal thoughts on its overall message. 1. System 1 and System 2 thinking. System 1 and System 2 thinking are two distinct modes of thinking that our brains use to process information and make decisions. System 1 thinking is fast, automatic, and intuitive. It operates largely outside of our conscious awareness and is responsible for many of our quick, reflexive responses to the world around us. For example, when we see a familiar face, System 1 thinking automatically recognizes it without us having to consciously think about it. System 2 thinking, on the other hand, is slower, more deliberate, and more effortful. It involves conscious attention and mental effort. System 2 thinking is used when we need to solve a complex problem, analyze information, or evaluate a decision. Kahneman argues that System 1 thinking is often prone to biases and errors because it relies on mental shortcuts, or heuristics, that can lead us astray. For example, we may be more likely to make decisions based on what is most readily available in our memory, rather than on accurate data. Understanding the distinction between System 1 and System 2 thinking can help us become more aware of our own cognitive biases and make better decisions by using System 2 thinking to deliberately slow down and evaluate information more carefully. 2. Heuristics and biases. Heuristics and biases are a fundamental aspect of human decision-making, and can have a significant impact on the quality of our judgments and choices. One example of a heuristic that can lead to a bias is the availability heuristic. This is a mental shortcut in which we rely on the ease with which examples or instances of a particular phenomenon come to mind to make judgments about the frequency or likelihood of that phenomenon. For example, if you see a news story about a shark attack, you may become more afraid of sharks, even if the probability of being attacked by a shark is quite low. This is because the vividness and emotional salience of the news story can make the possibility of a shark attack more easily available in your memory, leading you to overestimate the frequency of such events. Another example of a bias that can result from heuristics is the confirmation bias. This is a tendency to seek out information that confirms our pre-existing beliefs and ignore information that contradicts them. For instance, if someone strongly believes that climate change is not real, they may actively seek out sources of information that support this belief, while dismissing evidence that supports the opposite view. This can result in a distorted and inaccurate understanding of the issue. By understanding these heuristics and biases, we can become more aware of our own thinking processes and take steps to mitigate their impact on our decision-making. 3. Prospect theory and loss aversion. This theory is based on the idea that people do not evaluate outcomes solely in terms of their final value, but also in terms of gains and losses relative to a reference point. In other words, losses are felt more keenly than gains, and people are often more risk-averse when faced with the possibility of a loss than they are when facing the possibility of a gain. For example, imagine that you are offered two options. A guaranteed win of $100, or B, a 50% chance to win $200 and a 50% chance to win nothing. Most people would choose option A, even though option B has a higher expected value of $100. This is because people are risk-averse when it comes to gains and are more likely to choose a sure thing, rather than risk losing the chance of winning anything. On the other hand, if you were offered two options, A, a guaranteed loss of $100, or B, a 50% chance to lose $200 and a 50% chance to lose nothing, most people would choose option B. This is because people are risk-seeking when it comes to losses, and are willing to take a chance on a potentially better outcome rather than accepting a certain loss. Prospect theory and loss aversion have important implications for decision-making in a variety of contexts, including finance, business, and public policy. 4. Anchoring and adjustment. Anchoring and adjustment is a cognitive bias in which people rely too heavily on the first piece of information they receive, the anchor, when making subsequent judgments or estimates. Example of anchoring and adjustment is in the context of negotiations. If someone makes an initial offer that is very high or very low, it can affect the subsequent negotiation process, as both parties adjust their positions relative to the initial offer. To mitigate the impact of anchoring and adjustment, it is important to be aware of the influence of initial anchor values and to make an effort to adjust our estimates or judgments based on new information. This can involve questioning the validity of the anchor value, seeking out additional sources of information, and engaging in deliberate and systematic thinking when making important decisions. 5. The power of priming. The power of priming is a cognitive bias in which exposure to one stimulus influences our response to a subsequent stimulus, even if the two stimuli are unrelated. Priming can occur in a variety of ways, such as through visual or auditory cues, or through the activation of certain concepts or ideas in our minds. For example, if you are shown a picture of a banana, you may be more likely to complete the word yellow if asked to fill in the blank in the word _LO, even though the word yellow has nothing to do with bananas. Priming can have important implications for a variety of contexts, such as marketing, politics, and education. For example, political campaigns may use certain images or phrases to prime voters to associate their candidate with positive qualities, even if those qualities are not directly related to the candidate's policies or positions. 6. The planning fallacy. The planning fallacy is a cognitive bias in which people tend to underestimate the time and resources required to complete a task, despite evidence to the contrary. The planning fallacy often occurs when people rely too heavily on optimistic scenarios and best-case scenarios, rather than considering the full range of possible outcomes and obstacles that could arise. This bias can lead to poor planning and decision-making, as people may fail to anticipate potential delays, setbacks, and costs. Example of the planning fallacy is in the context of personal goals and projects. For instance, if you are planning to write a book, you may underestimate the time and effort required to complete the task, and fail to anticipate potential obstacles such as writer's block or research delays. To mitigate the impact of the planning fallacy, it is important to approach planning and decision-making with a realistic and critical mindset. 7. Regression to the mean. The phenomenon of regression to the mean is a statistical tendency for extreme or unusual scores or measurements to move towards the average over time. Regression to the mean occurs because extreme or unusual scores are often the result of random variation or measurement error, rather than consistent patterns or trends. As a result, these scores are unlikely to persist over time, and are more likely to revert back towards the average or mean score. One example of regression to the mean is in the context of sports performance. If a basketball player scores a particularly high number of points in one game, it is unlikely that they will continue to score at that level in subsequent games. Instead, their performance is likely to regress towards their average or mean performance over time. To avoid the pitfalls of regression to the mean, it is important to carefully evaluate the underlying causes and patterns behind extreme or unusual scores, and to consider the role of random variation and measurement error. This can involve collecting more data and conducting statistical analyses to determine whether a pattern is truly significant, rather than relying solely on isolated or anecdotal data points. Additionally, it can be helpful to establish baseline measurements and expectations to provide a more accurate reference point for evaluating performance or outcomes over time. 8. The framing effect. Framing effect is a cognitive bias in which people's decisions and perceptions are influenced by the way information is presented or framed. The framing effect occurs because people tend to focus on the surface-level features of a message, rather than considering the underlying content and context. As a result, the way information is framed can significantly impact people's judgments and decisions, even when the content of the message is the same. One classic example of the framing effect is in the context of medical decision-making. Studies have shown that patients are more likely to opt for a medical procedure if it is framed in terms of the potential benefits rather than the potential risks. For example, if a medical procedure is described as having a 90% success rate, patients are more likely to choose it than if it is described as having a 10% failure rate, even though these two descriptions convey the same information. To avoid the pitfalls of the framing effect, it is important to approach information and decision-making with a critical and nuanced mindset. In conclusion, Thinking, Fast and Slow is an exceptional book that offers valuable insights into the way we think and make decisions. It's a must-read for anyone who wants to better understand their own mind and the minds of others. Whether you're interested in psychology, economics, or just want to improve your decision-making skills, this book is definitely worth checking out. Thank you for watching.